I think part of being human is being able intellectually, emotionally, spiritually to hold several truths. Part of complexity, and I would argue actually Taoist philosophy is complexity. It's just that we haven't really articulated a lot of that into English.
Hi, my name is Dave, and this is the Light Forest Podcast, a journey of exploration to bring more light into how we live and regenerate our planet.
Welcome, Jules.
Thank you, Dave.
The Light Forest. I was going to say podcast, but in some sense, it's welcome to the Light Forest.
Indeed.
So, Jules, you are a consultant, entrepreneur, translator, writer, and linguist, and nascent generalist. You hold many masks, hats, titles, identities, and I think you bring that in many ways. You've been a consultant with Cognitive Edge for over 15 years. You've been helping multinationals and SMEs around the world and governments sense make this sometimes complicated, seemingly complicated, but perhaps just complex world. And we'll dig into that. And you've been writing a Substack called the Contrapuntal, which has been a way for you to share a lot of your sense making. You're also involved with new communities and movements such as Seapunk, which you're seeding as well. So I think there's just so many touch points and so many directions that we will sort of take our travel to in this forest as we start. And we'll, keep our eyes out for all kinds of birds and animals and trees. But before we go anywhere, I'm curious because I've been very place-based, and so I would love to know where since 2025. Tell me, where have you been? What are the cities that you've been to? Give us a little bit of a roadmap of your physical journey.
Well, I've been to Bangkok. I'm in Chiang Mai now. I'm just thinking of the region. I think I might have gone into Johor Bahru once, but that's just like a quick border crossing to get cheaper goods. And then I was in Cape Town, South Africa, and Johannesburg for a month in April.
Okay.
And then I recently embarked on about a month-long journey. So that was end of May to almost the end of June. I was in Estonia, the UK, England, and Wales specifically, and then in the US, Denver, Colorado Springs, Evergreen, all in Colorado, and then Washington D.C. and flew back home via Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and then back home. So I've been back in Asia for about 3 weeks, and yesterday I just flew up into Chiang Mai.
Wow.
Yes. That's just for now. There are quite a few more travels planned for this year as well. Nice. Mostly work related.
Yeah. Well, we're living in a time when there's a lot going on, which a lot going on, what I mean is in terms of war and conflict. Help us to start with a little bit of sense making, like how are you seeing the world right now? It's a big question, but how are you seeing where we are right now and the kinds of crisis that we're seeing, and how maybe complexity can help us understand this a bit more?
Wow. Yeah, we're starting big, aren't we? You're picking a very big thread, thick thread to pull on. In complexity, specifically Anthro Complexity, which is the complexity of human systems, we refer to it as being entangled. And a good analogy is what I just mentioned about thread. If you think about a ball of yarn that you maybe give to a cat to play with, and they pull on one of the strings of yarn, and it slowly starts to unravel, or it could become more tightly entangled. And this is a good analogy of a complex system because everything is entangled with everything else. As for this thread you've chosen to pull, I frame where we are as a species in the Anthropocene. I don't entirely agree with everything about how the Anthropocene is being framed, but I do think that as a species, humanity is at an inflection point, primarily ecologically, climate-wise. And one of the ways I like to remind myself about, or to give myself some perspective, is that yes, there's a lot of human-made news to be fearful or depressed about. Specifically, I'm referring to man-made conflicts, specifically like war and fightings and killings. But if you think about it from a climate perspective, if we're all going to die from some kind of, well, if a lot of us are going to die from some kind of climate-related event in the next 20 to 50 years, then what is conflict in comparison? Right? What is human conflict in comparison? It's just one way to frame a very, very complex world that we live in. But I actually think that zooming out and looking at the ecological crisis that we're in actually gives one very, very useful perspective, as well as a sense of urgency about what we as a species should do. That's the way I sense make. I'm not saying that the genocide in Gaza, I'm not saying that the on again, off again, let's say nuclear conflict between two nuclear powers like India and Pakistan, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine is not things that we should be concerned about. In fact, we should be very concerned. But all of that will pale in comparison to what the entire planet will face. And I include those in non-conflict areas, in richer developed countries. And yes, certainly the less developed countries are all going to suffer from the climate crisis. That's the way I frame it. It's my way of sense making. It might, for some, it might be a worse way to frame it, but I also think that it helps give very useful perspective.
So you mentioned inflection point, and you mentioned like the ecology as being one really core part, and I certainly resonate with that. I also look at the world and I see political systems right now, and there seems to be just the seeming sense that the institutions of our time, whether it's governments, whether it's corporations, even NGOs, just seem to be unable to deal with this inflection point. Like it's like they're the institutions that we've kind of entrusted the ability to understand and act in order for us to navigate these kinds of inflection points. But when we talk about the poly crisis, we talk about the meta crisis, and this feeling like, okay, we're at this inflection point, but who is going to navigate? And this is tricky. How do you see that?
I certainly think there's been an accelerated breakdown of trust in the institutions that a lot of us believe were created to lead us, right? Maybe if not lead very well, certainly to guide us, to provide some kind of pathway, right? And I'm referring specifically to international institutions that were formed after World War II, like the UN and all its associated bodies, by which I mean the World Bank, IMF, UNDP, etc., etc. Like these international institutions were meant to provide humanity with a new framework of international cooperation, moving onwards from the horrors of World War II, which, as I start to decolonize myself, I'm starting to call the War of the European Cousins. Certainly the First World War and the Second World War is but a sequel to that as well. And a lot of the other parts of the war were dragged into it unwillingly, right? Because it became a poly-country conflict. So this breakdown of trust in institutions, in the elites who convinced us that, they know best, that they can lead, that has certainly accelerated in an almost unthinkable way to me, or never before seen way in living memory. Within the past 10 years, but I think COVID in the past 5 years certainly accelerated that breakdown of trust to the point where I think it is almost irrecoverable. And of course, and I'm just going to state now that I am very realistic. I consider myself a realist. I'm from the Realpolitik school of international relations, for better or worse. Slightly cynical because of all I've seen and experienced about the nature of change and humanity, but also tempered with a very humanistic belief in the potential of human beings and human wills. I'll just state that now as caveats for whatever else I might say. And also, which might help give listeners an idea as to where I'm coming from and my own biases and my own angles. So this breakdown of trust, it's not the cause of the polycrisis or metacrisis. It is a symptom of it because of the way I think we have allowed very harmful ideas and institutions built on those ideas to run life and the world as we know it. I'm referring to not merely the banking system. Banks and banking systems have their place in the world. It's about the financialization of it, the hyper-financialization of the banking system to the point where it doesn't actually produce anything of actual material value. It leverages it up, it does arbitrage. And humans have always done that, but it's gotten to a point where someone can become filthy rich, producing very little of actual value to humanity, and be able to live like a king, like in feudal times, but because they're able to exploit. So it's a failure of the way the system was set up itself, as well as perverse incentives for other individuals to exploit those systems, and without the sort of mutual cooperation and aid that have characterized many systems in the past. Some of those comments, like Michel Bowens, for instance, talks and researches a lot about.
So seeing the breakdown of trust as a symptom, and when I hear also you talked about the ecology, and now you're talking about the financial system. I mean, you lived through perhaps the 2008 financial crisis quite at an important stages of your life. You also mentioned this sense that like we're creating things that are not really valuable. Like the financial system seems to be rewarding because there's a reward that's offered, and there are people who are creating in order to receive that reward. But what I seem to be here is that our system is incentivizing the creating of things that are not actually valuable and not actually serving perhaps our health, perhaps serving our relationships, perhaps serving our climate. Is that how you would characterize maybe where the financial system, the design of it, is maybe problematic, at least as we have it today?
Yeah, I suppose as a nascent generalist, and that is another caveat, is that I'm sure we've all seen memes, especially on Instagram or other platforms, where you make money, you spend your youth and your health in the pursuit of making money, and then you realize at a certain stage, usually by your mid-40s, that health problems might be starting to overtake you, not necessarily as a result of what you did in your 20s, it could be genetic as well, but very possibly triggered by lifestyle and lifestyle choices. And then you realize, oh, now I have to spend the money I make to try to regain the health that I had.
Bit of a con.
Yes, it's a bit of a con. But also, if we look past the individual, because we also live in a system, you can be the healthiest you could be, and you would still suffer from polluted air that you can do nothing about unless you create some kind of a hermetically sealed chamber where you can be completely free of polluted air. So there's the understanding that as much as you as an individual might be able to effect change, over the things you have agency on, there are externalities that you can't control. And that does lead to the point that you were saying about, at least for me and my generation, which is solidly mid-millennial, the crisis, the certain financial and also health crisis that we went through. So, specifically, you were referring to the great financial crisis of 2008, the GFC, and also more specifically in Singapore and parts of Asia, we had the SARS epidemic of 2003. I was 17 at the time. And just as an illustration, I did all I could to do well in my studies, to prepare for the college entrance exams. I had great hopes of being able to attend a liberal arts college in the US. My scores were good enough for that. So I was hoping to get a scholarship or something similar. And then SARS hit. Singapore was quite badly hit.
2003.
2003, yeah. And because it was very regional and contained well, it didn't really have a wide societal impact. But because my father was in pharmaceutical sales, and that was an opportunity for a lot of pharmaceutical companies to consolidate operations, especially in Asia Pacific, he got retrenched as a result. And that, of course, meant that, there wasn't going to be the resources available for a child to be able to go to college in the US, even with scholarships, right? It's at that point in time in the early 2000s, even in Singapore, it was still a major undertaking to send a child to the West for university level education. So that externality meant that I had choices to make, right? It wasn't really presented to me as a choice, but everything is a choice in some sense. So I chose to forego my university level education for a few years to start working full time in any entry level job that would have me, so that I could help support my family as the eldest child. It's a very Asian thing as well. Some other friends, some other people I've shared this story to, didn't really understand. They were like, well, you're not obliged to. It's not your responsibility as a child to help provide for your family. I was like, yes and no. There's a lot of context you're missing, cultural context, family context. But yes, it's not an unheard of story for especially the older children in Asian families to step up and help support the family in times of need. So yes, it was a choice, but it was also one shaped by externalities that I had no control over. And yes, that choice definitely shaped my career path, such as it is, and my life path. Because I started working full-time in 2005, which meant that I had a few years head start over my peers in just getting into the workforce.
So you bypassed the university?
I later started studying for university part-time in 2009. But so I was working full-time from 2005 to 2009, which meant I had about a 3 to 4 year head start to get established in the workforce, move from job to job, increase my salary and put away savings. But had I actually gone to university in the conventional way after 18, I would have graduated 2008-ish. Well, depending on the length of study, but 2007, 2008. And then I would have been with a cohort of fresh graduates, all fighting for the same jobs, especially in the liberal arts, and realizing that it was a very, very tough job market. I could have well been jobless for quite a few years at that point during the great financial crisis if I hadn't already been established in the workforce. So again, I couldn't have predicted that, but as with the benefit of hindsight, looking back now, it sort of worked out. I wouldn't lie and say it was easy, but it sort of worked out that I was able to have that have that foundation in the workforce, have some kind of job and skills that I could then build on that led me to where I am today.
Yeah, that's really interesting in the sense that circumstances led you to making a choice, but it was also a mixture of circumstances. that made you quite different then from the average, young adult, in the sense that you were able to skip those years of university and absorb experience in a whole different way. And today, for instance, since you mentioned trust earlier, I feel like one of the declines of trust is also in this idea of I will do X and then I will get Y, I will go to university, I will get this job, and then there's this path.
Yeah.
And we went through this linear path for a while, and some of us maybe dropped off a bit earlier, but in general, that's still been the mainstream idea. But you, in a way, very early on, intuitively, went off that mainstream path. Did you feel like what was that navigating just for yourself, like stepping off the dotted line and starting to do things differently while still following your interests and making now this career that you have for yourself?
I mean, to be very frank, I resented it for a long time. I mean, I don't know whether it's being Singaporean, raised in the generation that I was, full of arrogance about our economic development versus the rest of the region. Yeah, I mean, it took a lot of self-work and reflection. I certainly resented it for a long time because I felt like I should have been able to take a conventional path. I certainly know for a fact that had I been able to take a conventional path, I would be way more insufferable and arrogant than I was, or maybe still am. And that, I think, is that narrative, what we were sold, that almost all of us still buy into, is that, as you say, study hard, get a good education, get the best grades you can, get into the best university you can, get a degree in the most promising field that you can think of that will get you a, 5-figure monthly starting salary when you graduate. That narrative, certainly, especially in Singapore, I can't really speak for the rest of the world, so I won't, but certainly in Singapore, was very much pushed. And that is really no longer the case. As my friend and Seapunk founder Sam Choi was saying, our generation believed that when at least we felt that when we graduated, we would have those good jobs waiting for us. And what happened? The externality of the great financial crisis, especially those studying overseas, couldn't then get work visas to be able to stay in the US or the UK and had to return home. The origins of the Occupy movement, of crypto, etc. A lot of it can be traced back to that event in retrospect, because we realized that, okay, the system has failed us. So it's not all it's cracked up to be, sure. But then how do we create alternatives, right? Whether in terms of systems or institutions or things that might actually serve us, right? And not just serve us selfishly, but also the people in the world around us.
Yeah, and to refer back to trust and this breakdown in trust. Oftentimes the framing is the problem is that trust is not there. But hearing you speak and talk about how we put our faith in these institutions or in certain paths and certain dreams, and those paths didn't quite work out that way. And in some sense, the question is like, was that trust rightfully there in the first place? Like, should we have had our trust in these institutions? Was this sense of the trust itself was like almost falsely placed? And so what we're seeing now is the fact that we placed that trust in the wrong place. It's like you put your cup of tea on like a faulty, like a chair, and then you get upset with the chair, but it's like that was the structures were wrong to begin with. Because then it sort of then makes our task at hand, or like thinking about our complex system today, where we're like, okay, we got to go deeper than what we think. Like trust is not going to come back by me placing this cup in a different angle.
Yeah. Wow, that's a great question, a deep one as well. I think that a lot of us bought, and I'm saying our parents as well, and grandparents, a lot of us bought into the narrative of rapid economic development because, and let's be very fair, up until recently, our ancestors would be astonished, our recent ancestors would be astonished at the excess of, say, even just food and drink that's available to
Like a
us.
supermarket
Yes,
would just be
yeah.
outrageous.
I like to say that I like to frame it as, you know, it has only been, as in certainly for like China, it's only been in the past couple of generations, if that, or 1.5 generations, that Chinese people have not faced some kind of famine, like mass famine or poverty. Like I do believe actually one of the reasons why our greeting in Chinese, obviously just like put aside ni hao, right? Because that's just trite, is actually have you eaten? Have you eaten rice? Or are you full? Have you eaten until you're full? Like that has to come from somewhere, right? That is some kind of cultural encoding, some kind of cultural memory. I'm not sure what it might be in your mother tongue, but certainly in across Chinese languages, it's about have you eaten?
I was also struck, since you mentioned Chinese, when they asked like how many people you have in your family.
Yeah.
It's like how many mouths.
Yes, how many
do you have?
mouths?
And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, that's an interesting way to
Like
ask.
they will say, 我们一家三口, right? There are 3 mouths in our family. So it's basically to say that we have 3 mouths to feed, right? Because what else would mouths be for? And, you know, of course, in some settings, like international settings, like aviation is about souls, which is, of course, a very Judeo-Christian concept. How many souls are there on board this vessel or this aircraft? For us, is 你们家有几口? Right? Yeah. So it's it's a very different cultural framing, right? And also since we're on this slight tangent, what do we call? Well, we call some ghosts hungry ghosts, right? Or even when we're teasing a child about seeming to have a bottomless leg or hollow stomach, is, you know, why are you being a hungry ghost, right? Basically, or which hungry ghost spirit has like possessed your stomach kind of thing, right? It's yeah, it has to come, this encoding has to come from somewhere, probably collective trauma around famine and not having enough to eat. But yeah, so just to go back to your point, I think we bought into this narrative because rapid economic development promised us a future where we probably wouldn't have to go hungry again, or our descendants. And to an extent that is true, because industrial, you know, the food industrial complex certainly produces enough for humanity to live on, but is also equally stripped out a lot of the nutrients from the ground, from the food they produce, and as a result, us, because we are what we eat. And I think that this breakdown of trust in institutions does not equate to a breakdown of trust amongst people. I think actually to bring us from the dark forest to the light forest is the fact that we've always had communities. As human beings, we are social creatures. We have demes, we have macro demes, you know, and that's more about our hunter-gatherer past. But if we can regain communities, and I don't just mean of blood and birth, I also mean of like-minded spirits, of like-minded thinkers and beings, this is one of the ways that we can regain trust with each other and therefore in these communities. And should these communities choose to build institutions, because it is a human instinct to build institutions to scale, then maybe these institutions can engender some kind of trust that we do not currently have in institutions. Now, I think we should do that with caution, because I think that a lot of things move cyclically. But certainly I think that trust can be regained, just not in what we currently have.
Like, we're not going to go back to that old story, but maybe the feeling of anxiety that's prevailing is that there's a lack of a new story. And we're discovering that. Yeah, I mean, just going back, almost riffing on a few points you've made so far, which is how much we're shaped by our environment, by our time. You know, you mentioned famine shaping language. The fact that, you know, we've all grown up in Asia in a time when the idea of Asia itself maybe is questionable. It's like exists as a region, as a geography, but like as a culture and an idea, I feel like, you know, we are Asians are sort of rediscovering and almost, you know, sometimes our minds are so shaped by this neoliberal or this like Western Enlightenment period era sort of style of thinking, that it's just a challenge to do that. And then, so I guess then the question is that, as we are at this inflection point, and if we've, as you've articulated, like the trust has broken down, and the trust in this neoliberal idea of growth, in this idea of like material progress, and this path of like linear career progression is on its last legs if it hasn't already collapsed yet. Then we have this opportunity in this moment. That's one way to see it, to feel like we have agency in our own lives and maybe collectively to start to try something new.
Yeah.
Perhaps a level of newness that our previous, generations were just not in that state to do that. And there's this feeling then in this inflection point that, as you mentioned, to move from the dark forest to the light forest, we actually have this chance to do that.
Yeah.
To make some, that's the feeling of like to make some structural changes, to make systemic changes, and to do that. And that's really interesting. And you're from Singapore. You're Chinese, Singaporean. But I think there's a lot more depth than dimensions when you even say Chinese.
Yeah. Well, it's a good catch-all term, right? It's a suitcase word.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about then, because you referred earlier about like decolonizing yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's a very nice way to unpack this part then. Like what's been your journey of decolonizing yourself? How do you see this? How do you see this question?
Oh, wow. So Sam and I have written an essay on decolonizing the imaginary for submission to the Chiang Mai University conference later this week on decolonizing Southeast Asian studies, which is an academic discipline. We make the argument that actually what we need is a meta layer of decolonization, and it's decolonizing the imaginary or the imagination, whether your individual imagination or the collective imagination, because lots have been researched and written about decolonizing of the economic, of the academic, of the ecological, and etc., the territorial, and we won't go into that because that's they deserve their own time and space. But we haven't started from the imaginary, right? Can you, like, what shapes your imagination? I like to ask people, what language do you dream in? If language features in your dreams as a start, what shapes your imagination, right? What's the root of your imagination? And a lot of people haven't necessarily considered that because, in a way, why would you, right? The world was presented to you by your parents, by your caregivers, by the environment you grew up around. Not many of us question it until we are faced with externalities or with personal crises. So if you take the imaginary of, for instance, sovereignty and commons, most of us were raised, well, all of us living now, I believe. I don't think there are any more living who were born and raised during imperial or empire times anymore. All of us were born and raised in the imaginary, in our imaginations, that there can only be such a thing as a nation state, as a strong nation state that wields centralized power and authority, and there's one national language, and there is a national flag, and there's a national anthem, and a pledge, and a creed, and all of the kind of stuff that goes into nation building, which, if you think for ancient civilizations, specifically my heritage civilization, which is broadly speaking Chinese, and yours, which is broadly speaking Indian, the fact that you have to cobble together so many ethnicities and languages and religions who don't necessarily like each other for a start, and infighting is very common. In fact, it's probably the thing that, starts destroying things in the first place. To cobble that together into something national, right? It's almost unthinkable. It's very much a Westphalian concept. Big sovereignty, small commons. And this is one of the imaginaries that we have yet to decolonize, because there are very few people I've met so far that can conceive of a world where we have smaller sovereignties and bigger commons, because that would break down the entire concept of having a nation state of power.
If you weren't
of
reliant on
control.
the sovereign for the
Yeah,
commons.
yeah. But I'll just give you a somewhat ironic case in point, is that people think the PRC, the People's Republic of China, is a huge, monolithic, centralized government, and all the orders flow down from Beijing, and that's it, man. I'm like, yeah, nah. Like anyone who's actually lived and worked in China or have had some kind of contact with China and Chinese people knows that actually it's the local government, right? Yeah. It's actually quite decentralized. Sure, there's the Politburo and so on and so forth. And yes, a lot of stuff and noise happens in Beijing, but on a day-to-day basis, it's the local governments that run the show, and they actually have to run the show well because they know that their performance review, for the local officials, their performance review rests on that. And actually locals, like local citizens, have no qualms about protesting, about writing in complaints, and they're pretty rowdy about it. I mean, this is a feature of Chinese people. And actually, if you look deeper into history, that has always been the case in at least Chinese history, right? There's a famous saying, 天高地远, right? It says in the heavens, the emperor is as far as the heavens are high.
山高皇帝远.
山高地远. Which is to say, okay, sure, the emperor is there, Beijing is there, or Nanjing is there, but hey, way down south in Hainan, for instance, or somewhere along, the southern coasts, is a local magistrate and a local yamen that actually, wields the power. So we have that. We have examples of that in our history, not so recent history as well. There are lots of examples around the world where local and regional governments are doing great things, but we still haven't decolonized the imaginary of the big sovereignties, the nation states.
When I hear you talk about decentralization, I think also it reminds me of how when I studied in the US particularly, and I did you did business classes, and one of the first things you learn about around things like international business and international communications, this simplistic idea that West individual, Asia collective.
Oh my goodness, I could go on for that for about an hour.
And it's like give us a little bit.
So if we take the lens of business studies, for instance, or even just like general studies, it's that whole very crude dichotomy of individualistic versus collectivist, right? One study. I'm like, guys, yes, but do you know the kind of collectivism we have? And I'll just speak to the culture I know. If we just take Chinese culture, specifically Southern Chinese culture, the collectivism you speak of is actually more like clan-based, gang or triad-based, or like mutual association, mutual aid association, clan association-based collectivism. It's like, screw everyone else, as long as we're fine. That is the kind of collectivism you're talking about. So yes, it is collectivist, but only if you're in the in-group. If you're not in the in-group, well, also the assumption in Chinese culture is that you have to belong to somewhere. The saying is always like, up until recently, it's almost unthinkable. Like they'll say, 老家, right? Like where's your hometown, or where's your ancestral village, or like who do you belong to? What family are you from, right? It's never about you as the individual. So yes, as a cultural encoding is relational, the cultural DNA, you have to belong to somewhere, someone. How can you not have parents, so to speak, even if you're not on good terms with them? But the collectivism is to a point. You can't really say that as a whole, as a culture, that it's collectivist. And in the same way, I see this is why it's so crude, is because you could look at the West or in Western societies, sometimes very unfairly maligned, but they have communities too, pretty strong ones. They have, and those are collectivists. If you just take, some Christian communities, for example, you look at the Mennonites, you look at the Amish, you look at, and they tend to be somewhat religion-based, but they are collectivists, like they are true collectivists in that sense. So It's just, I think it's very reductionist in business studies because you have to teach a curriculum. You have to get people to frame the world in one way. And one of the easiest ways is, okay, Western is individualistic and Eastern is collectivist. I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. Like, how much do you want to unpack that?
Yeah, and then that propagates through systems and through, institutions. And then ultimately, Asians learn about Asia through this problematic reductionist lens,
Ironic, huh?
which then limits our imagination.
Oh,
And then we're sort of stuck in this, how could we, how do we move out of this nation, Westphalian, very European, ethnic state concept, which may not even have worked for Europe for, for thousands of years. It's just this very moment in time,
after the 300 years war, which was a religious conflict.
Yeah.
Well,
And it like reminds me then, okay, I feel like this is the theme, inflection points.
Yeah.
Right? Like that was an inflection point in Europe. It went a certain way.
Yep.
And it just led to a whole set of cascading, effects, which we are experiencing today, 400 years later. Which maybe shows you the power sometimes where of like one moment of change, one decision made by just a small group of people, then have this cascading effect. Like now, as we're trying to reimagine, what I hear from you is we don't want to be again like another group of people, like reacting and then making that decision that will then ripple effect for the next 400 years. We want to try to deal with this inflection point, but like in a decentralized fashion, in a ground up fashion, encouraging and allowing people to imagine, yet a structure has to be created to allow for that.
Well, I think this is the tragedy of being human, right? Is that everything we do, because we are in a complex system, will have unintended consequences. And we are ethically responsible for them, but we can never know truly and fully in advance what those consequences will be. So that's what I mean by the tragedy of being human.
Yeah.
We have to do the next best thing. We have to adapt. So I'll just go back a little bit. We were mentioning the Treaty of Westphalia, came about after the 300 Years' War. A lot of people, and I know I made that throwaway remark about it being fundamentally a religious war, yes. But also it was a complex convergence of issues. It was, impending industrialization. It was the breakdown of the feudal system. It was obviously bickering warlords and generals and kings. So it wasn't just the 300 Years' War, right? It wasn't just the Treaty of Westphalia. It was all coming together in that moment of time, and it seemed like the most logical thing to do at the time. And that's what I mean by right now, it's what seems to be the best possible thing to do, or things to do. And the point I want to make also is, as much as we, talk about how, the Westphalian nation state is no longer really fit for purpose, especially in the dark forest as we start to move into the light forest. I want to also specify, well, my personal opinion is that at least in Asia, for that point in time, after emerging from either empire or colonization or tribalism, the nation state seemed like the most logical thing to do. It was entry into a league of nations, literally, right? It seemed to be the best possible path out of tribal fighting, clan wars, piecing together the remnants of a colony. There was always going to be, say, pulled apart by different ethnicities and languages and religions in the first place. So in complexity terms, it fit that moment in time, right? It was the best possible thing, one of the best possible things that could have been done at that point in time. But now, where we are, I think new systems, new imaginaries are needed, right? Let's not even talk about systems until we have talked about the right stories. In complexity terms, we call it, what are the narrative, the assemblages of narratives that constitute a culture, a system? what is the substrate, right? What lies underneath the surface of a culture, of a society.
And that's something that we're just not trained to really look at. Like, we all respond to stories, we live stories, we intuitively tell and listen to stories all the time, but I think on a day-to-day, sometimes we don't appreciate just the power and the value and the driving force that stories have.
Oh, absolutely. So tell me the last time numbers moved your heart and stats made you go, ooh. Have you ever been seduced by statistics? I mean, for some people maybe, but it's stories. Right?
And then that's why where we seem to be today. I mean, we talked about the ecological crisis at the start. We were not short of data.
No, we're not short of data.
We've got numbers and reports, and we can. There's PhDs and there's just so much published, but we don't seem to be moved enough by that.
No, because we can't see it. We're very relational creatures. We are very sensing creatures. If we are in possession of all our senses, we need to be able to see, smell, touch, feel. And you can tell me that hares, right? Not rabbits, apparently. I learned this. Like hares might be dying out because their natural habitats are being destroyed by humans. But until you maybe actually see dead hares or realize that there are no more hares, it really wouldn't hit you. There's not that visceral push, punch to the gut to do something about it.
Yeah. I want to ask you, just come to me to ask you about, you're operating in multiple spaces, in the sense that you are both part of very mainstream, big sovereign spaces, let's call them.
Yes.
That while also, subverting, while also being part of Seapunk and building the Seapunk movement, and just part of other counterculture movements at the same time, you're sort of able to straddle these multiple truths and be this integrated whole. How are you seeing and experiencing the other people in the big sovereign spaces? Like, not the ones who are at the bottom, but the ones who are in the decision-making spaces, the ones who are they clinging on to the old story? How do you see them sort of responding and shifting? Like, what's your sense-making feeling of being in that space as well?
Well, if you can't beat them, join them, right? No, not necessarily kidding. I think to go back to a complexity lens and the Cynefin framework for decision-making and sense-making, the Cynefin itself, the Welsh word, is apparently poorly translated into English as habitat, but it's more like the place of your multiple belongings. So it's the understanding that as an individual, you hold many different yous, many different identities and roles, right? And we intuitively understand that. Dave, you are a son. You have to be someone's son just by existing, right? You are someone's son, you are someone's relative, you are someone's friend, you are someone's partner, you were someone's employee, etc., etc. And you are certainly part of a community, various communities. And all of these roles and identities have the right time and the right place for them to emerge. You are perhaps, the Chinese call it filial and maybe anxious son if your parents, fall ill and if you take care of them. But equally, you can be a playful cousin, right, with your cousins. So it's about understanding that we have this multiplicity of identities and belongings, and that's okay, right? So I don't necessarily have to resolve that polarity or tension, as you say, being in two worlds. I think that is just actually more a feature of myself than a bug because, as James C. Scott puts it, most Southeast Asians are ungovernable. So, as kind of ungovernable as Muding. So which is why she's also the Seapunk mascot for now. The sense making I have is that, and this is from my experience working with leaders or people who have to lead, the best leaders don't call themselves leaders. They just do. A lot of them are none the wiser than any of us are about what comes next. anyone who says they know what the future is like is lying. So as a start, don't believe them. But the best leaders amongst us are very concerned, both at a strategic and ethical level, about making the sort of decisions that will have the best possible impact on the world, on the people they're leading, and humanity in general. I certainly think that there's uncertainty is now no longer questioned, right? The complexity of the world, uncertainty is no longer questioned. It used to be in the past that we had to convince people that complexity exists, that there are complex systems, rather than it being more linear or complicated, especially within organizations. But now I think, our macro environment, our macroeconomic environment, our geopolitical systems are basically at a point where no one can argue that the world is uncertain and in flux and complexity abounds. My sense making is that I'm sure there's a subset of the sociopathic leaders or people at the top that you see of in movies and read about. And there's certainly some of them, but I don't think that that layer is characterized by those sort of people. I genuinely think that a lot of the leaders or people who have to lead are deeply concerned about the state of the world, where we're going, how best to lead. And a lot of my role is actually to help facilitate that with frameworks, with guidance, with some advice.
Yeah. So on that note, then, where do you see, putting on your forecast, future hat? What's your feeling of where these inflection points are gonna turn? What might be the left-right switches? What might be the next few years looking like? Where should we look to?
I think in the broadest of strokes, I will say that there will be some kind of decentralization, whether a process happening, whether or not that is violent, whether spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, which is the worst kinds of violence in that sense. Whether it is violent or not is hard to say. I actually think that is down to humanity. That's down to us as a species to actively make choices about. Some form of decentralization is inevitable. I mean, look, the US has been in a civil war for at least the past 10 years, maybe 5 years if we're going to be kind about it. It's just not the Civil War of the 1860s where people put on uniforms and, carried muskets and rifles and shot at each other. It could get to that, but it's an ideological civil war.
And it's still violence.
Oh, absolutely violent, and the thing is that, that acknowledging that as a possible process of decentralization is, again, almost unthinkable to a lot of Americans or even people around the world, because it's the United States of America.
And like this decentralization, I mean, at the global narrative level, it's the US and NATO West versus like maybe the BRICS. Although the BRICS, China and India being, cooperative partners is far-fetched. But this idea that the BRICS itself being like the force of the global South, yet like in so many structural ways, the financial systems, the political systems don't really differ a whole lot.
No.
So like when you're talking about decentralization, you're really talking about at a deeper level. It's not about moving away from the unipolar system to like the multipolar system as, it's talked about now. That's the BRICS, the global South narrative. It's not multipolar decentralization. It's a really fundamental community, social level.
Yeah, that would be like the multipolarity that you're speaking of. That would be like the most obvious manifestation of decentralization. But you're quite right. I actually do mean decentralization as a start, the decolonizing of that imaginary, right? And just to come back again to the sovereignties and commons, seemingly dichotomy of that, is that if you think about the decentralization of financial systems, whether it's SWIFT, whether it's IBAN, or China's system, I think is CIPS or something like that, CIPS or something, or whatever other system that you can think of that exists, that is still functioning as some kind of polarity. But if you're thinking about maybe blockchain, crypto, or different kinds of systems that allow people to exchange value for goods produced, right, or value produced, that kind of decentralization, I think, is very much in the works. What emerges as actually viable for human survival and thriving remains to be seen. But I do think that's certainly in our future. And in addition to that, other kinds of decentralization will be in governance. It will be in the way that we distribute goods in the commons, right? It's no longer just, okay, if you have $10 worth of legal tender, you will be able to get $10 worth of vegetables, say, right? Because there are, and humans have had these systems in the past. It's just that as in our bid to scale and institutionalize, it came to be commonly held that the only way you can get $10 worth of vegetables is to have $10. But in the past, you could exchange, I don't know, maybe eggs for vegetables. The gift economy, like the reciprocity, gift economy, barter, that has always existed. And I do think that some form of that is going to be in our future as well. So not everything is about legal tender and money. And that will have implications for the financial and banking system as well.
A decentralization of value.
Yes. Yeah. Well, a reimagination of value. Because right now, a lot of what we conceive of value is someone being able to peck away at a laptop, a keyboard, and, guilty as charged for us knowledge workers. And somehow we are paid outsized to, say, a farmer who toils in all kinds of weather to be able to produce food that nourishes all of us.
I think the farmer food example is one that really hits home. Like here in Chiang Mai, learning from people who are farmers and who are trying to move to organic farming and find how difficult and unprofitable it is because the system just doesn't value what they're doing. Yet you can go onto YouTube and generate AI content and make thousands of dollars. I mean, I don't know, the Tate Academy or something like that, which is promising and probably delivering people thousands of dollars of income per month just by creating garbage, because that seems to be the hack.
So it's very interesting that as part of Chinese cultural DNA, and you may know this already from your studies and immersion in Chinese culture, is that in as far as we had some kind of cultural hierarchy, actually farmers were ranked above merchants. And certainly soldiers were lowest of the low because, not a desired thing. But farmers were placed above merchants because there is this cultural understanding that the person who toils to produce things of value that nourishes the entire community, it should be placed above, at least in regard and understanding, should be placed above people who merely exploit loopholes or are middlemen. I'm not saying that isn't necessary in some cases. Middlemen who don't actually produce anything. So this value on production.
Rent seeking.
Rent seeking. So this value on production, has always existed in some cultures. And I actually think it's a good way to frame how we might think about, things in the future. So.
Wow, that's a very nice list of topics. Probably topics I could dig in further with the podcast and your different guests. So then in part of this reimagination, part of this decolonization, you've referenced your Chinese identity many times and brought up examples.
That was part of decolonization,
How do you see the role for, Chinese, East Asian philosophies particularly maybe Taoism or Buddhism. Maybe you could share in your own decolonization journey as Jules, as well as maybe decolonization as thinking from systems thinking, and how we bring in different frameworks that might bring value in a different way. And a side sort of anecdote to the point you just mentioned about farmers being positioned higher than merchants. I also learned about ethical codes of war and warfare, and how in most parts of the world, seed banks were considered off limits. Like when you pillaged and war, you just like maybe libraries, but seed banks were considered to be the most core thing that you don't. Which in our current system and current like forms of warfare, hearing stories about seed banks in Iraq and Afghanistan and many parts of the world being strategically targeted as ways to control people, and like that was just considered to be off, like ethically, like it's just not done. As an interesting again example of putting food and what we really value higher than maybe just our power struggles and battles. But that's a sort of almost a digression.
Almost, but I'd like to add to that is that I think right now we are in rather dangerous zero-sum times. Whereas in the past, there was a almost common shared understanding that, hey, if we destroy the things that provide sustenance downstream, we're all screwed.
We're on this commons together.
Exactly, and that's why codes of warfare, codes of rules of engagement were created. For instance, you don't engage with civilians, and if you did, this is why then certain empires, certain armies were more effective, by which we mean genocidal, right? In Papua New Guinea, for instance, like the conflict and the violence there is off the charts, yes, but in the past, not so distant past actually, warriors who are invariably men have codes of conduct, rules of engagement. They did not touch non-warriors, i.e. women and children. And the fact that a lot of that has now been discarded for various reasons, a lot of it has to do with modernization and a stoking of ethnic tensions, it means that then it becomes all out and zero sum, like everyone's fair game. So yeah, I don't necessarily think it's a digression. I think it's a good thing to note as well. You're asking about decolonization.
Yeah, and connected to that prompt, so almost to like redo the prompt.
Prompt re-engineering. Yeah, go for it.
You also referred to your identity or your as a realist, and that school of thinking. So maybe some playful pushback. Like I've always struggled with the realist school in IR, and it being so rooted in this Hobbesian view of the world, short, nasty, brutish, which again was just that moment in time, and like that can become diffused and now colonized our thinking of politics and international relations. How do you hold that realist then school alongside your own, decolonizing journey, and how do you contend that? Yeah.
I think two things can exist at once. Many things can exist at once. I think part of being human is being able intellectually, emotionally, spiritually to hold several truths together as equally valid, but maybe not relevant or adaptable to the times. Like, I think the way I hold attention is that as much as I would like to believe that we are moving towards a light forest, and as much as I like to believe that the majority of humanity is yearning for a light forest, for humanistic ways of relating to each other, there are certainly bad actors with disproportionate amount of power who are shaping externalities beyond our control. And we talk a lot about the power of the collective and the power of the masses to rise up, etc. Yes, and not necessarily always the case.
Yeah.
So I think that's how I hold attention. I think I find And now to go back to the original prompt, I actually find that Taoist philosophy actually very helpful in holding many things at once, because part of complexity, and I would argue actually Taoist philosophy is complexity. It's just that we haven't really articulated a lot of that into English. It's about accepting the world as it is and not as we would like it to be. And that actually, if we can start with that and really absorb and internalize it, it actually takes away a lot of anxiety, a lot of resentment, a lot of, but it should not be this way, right? Which is, frankly, a very teenager way of looking at the world. Yeah, but the world is not fair. Yes. Like, I mean, most of us have gotten past this stage.
You're still describing like half of, NGO, civil society, media.
Yeah, that would be another podcast. So with complexity, starting with seeing the world as it is, in many ways, acknowledging it as being the nasty, brutish, short, Hobbesian world that it very much is. And nature has many examples of that, right? The what is that insect that only lives like 24 hours or something, or the flower? There are many examples in nature as well where we would consider it nasty, brutish, short, but they also serve a purpose in nature. Now, I'm not romanticizing human behavior like that, but accepting the world for what it is and then finding ways in which we can shift it or improve it is a far more realistic and far more energy-saving way of working with complexity. Because I'll just take an organizational example, is like, those of us unfortunate to have lived through it or be part of it may have, these sort of like change programs, right? Or transformation programs, sure. But these have an end goal in mind, right? A desired end state, which is usually set by the people in power. And then we have to execute it or, face consequences, or it could just die some kind of natural death and no one would be any the wiser. Now, if you truly want to transform a system, whether an organization or a community or a society, you actually have to start with where we are. You have to understand the assemblages of narratives. You have to understand the substrate before you can even look for avenues of change. Because if some narrative beliefs are so strongly held, you could spend decades trying to shift those narratives and you would run out of steam eventually, and that would be a poor use of your energy. So and this is what I mean by being pragmatic and realist, is not necessarily a bad thing. Now, I know obviously in IR, there are schools with names. It's a warping of that. But being realistic, I think, is actually being kind to ourselves. So, and I'm not an IR specialist. I did not study IR. You did actually. So what I would actually say about IR is that one of the hopes I have for IR as a field of study or academic discipline is actually a bit of a decolonizing as well of the imaginaries that it is rooted in. Because, of course, we have to admit that IR also formed, as part of post-World War II institutions.
I think I really like that rooting of grounding of seeing and accepting the world as it is, as a starting point really for anything, and also being kind to yourself. Like, we are far from perfect people and we do all kinds of things, and sometimes accepting our own imperfections and being kind to ourselves in the same way where we can then maybe be compassionate for the world around us, whether even if it may be someone committing violence, and seeing that that might also come from a place of that we cannot see and we cannot judge, and some sort of lack of love in their own life.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I mean, you mentioned like also in Buddhism, for instance, like this seeing illusions is the whole meditation journey, or the whole journey of awakening, is to move past illusions. And yet in our modern Pale, being disillusioned is often like considered, this negative, like you're disillusioned.
Yeah.
Yet, like, a different view of it was to see that, as the illusions drop, you start to see reality. You start to experience it and see it for what it is, and accept it for what it is. And I also, and I really accept, and I see your point of also the sort of Hobbesian view of the world as to refer to, like, we were in the session with Michel on Cosmo Local together, and he talked about seasonality, and he talked about how having the right strategy, choosing the right strategy in accordance to the season, and the Hobbesian view of the world in that school of IR, that dark forest protocol, worked, and that the world was in that design, in that protocol, so you kind of needed to survive and thrive, and so you have to live in that protocol. And so discarding it or sort of attacking it isn't useful. Yet, like, and this is where it gets interesting, and I loved your view on this, is that at some point, the world's shifting, it's changing. At some point, our strategy has to change to be in season, and maybe what worked in the past isn't working anymore. And so we have to be this adaptive to see reality as it is as well, because reality is today in this moment isn't what it was yesterday.
Oh yeah.
And it isn't what it was, forget years from in the past. Yet we, in our way, we produce our own mental models of very much past-based. Right? Like, I did that, it worked for me, and so I just continued trying doing that. And that policies are sometimes like that, or even in our own lives, we make these decisions. Yet what I hear you say is that to be in this complex adaptive system, and to be adaptive in this complex system, is we really need to be awake to the changes and the shifts, and to know when we need to change our strategies.
Absolutely. And that is what's practical, that's what actionable. I mean, as a contrast, maybe I would love to offer how I feel I can be as idealistic and as light forest as anyone else, is that I would really love to see a future world where we heal from the collective and intergenerational trauma that influences a lot of the way that we parent future generations, so that that isn't passed on. I would love to see a future where we place equal, if not more, emphasis on love, like, cultivating love, by which I mean love in both the sort of like the Greek agape concept, or
unconditional love.
and and in a Buddhist frame, like compassion for all beings. So not just beings that you can see and feel, but also sentient beings, right? I would love to see a world where we're building that and placing that on higher pedestals than earning money, like getting richer, right? And because, and if I'm going to take a more systemic lens, the reason why we've always argued that we need to maintain armies or build defense and security is because if we don't, then we'll be weak. And then others may then attack us and brutalize us. And that's certainly been true in our history, in humanity's history. But if we start from a more idealistic, if we have a more idealistic starting point about looking at the future, why do humans fight? Right? Why are we in conflict with each other? In many cases, what we can see from the outside is that fighting over resources. Right? Oh, I want this river because it seems better, and then so your family can't have that river.
And give me security.
Give you security. And the fact that and we want to extract, we want to have control over these resources so that we can be superior and we can maintain armies, etc., etc. But what if we had a kind of future? And I don't think this is realistic, but again, as part of the light, thinking about the light forest, what if we had a future where we elevate compassion and love and shared resources and commons that will in turn build secure, content, living with nature, human beings and communities that are so emotionally and spiritually and mentally resilient, and also physically strong, right? To live with nature, with the world, you have to be strong, because there are wild animals as well. They're still animals.
There's plenty around.
There's plenty, right? The mosquito, the mighty mosquito is pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Like what if we had communities of people who are strong in all the best possible ways, that physically fighting, right, doesn't seem that necessary? What if everyone was taught de-escalation techniques and healthy confrontation, as part of being human? And the Aboriginals of Australia, like I think Tyson Yunkaporta's Sand Talk should be essential reading. It's not, they have never not acknowledged violence as part of the human condition, but they have created ways of working with it. Right? Like, hey, their women fight as much as their men. In fact, in a way, like even more vicious and violent in the way they fight. But there are
ways to channel that energy.
Yes, there are rituals, there are channels, there are protocols for that. And I think right now, because our protocols are so skewed and our incentives so perverse, that we've become this version of ourselves as human beings that I think we should all be not very proud of. And I think in my idealistic light forest future, this is the way we would be raising future generations and healing older ones. And trying to create the sort of world that, assuming we haven't completely destroyed the planet. And I actually believe that the planet will have its comeuppance against human beings in the longer run. But for as long as humans are on this planet, if we can create that kind of light forest future, then I think we would have diminished the need for standing armies and weapons and destruction.
I like that vision you've painted.
I like it too.
and what I'll say is, like, one is, while it may seem idealistic, I feel like our minds sometimes cannot compute living that. Yet, like, who knows? And like emergence in nature has shown, to be just unpredictable. Emergence is that, right? It's nothing that can be planned or even solved in a linear fashion. And I think that's where I feel the value I hold for this light forest future, because for sure there are moments in my own life on a day-to-day basis, or even sometimes when I'm thinking, I'm like, what do you mean, like, this light forest future? Like, is this? And every now and then you'll meet someone who's just just sour and cynical, and in a way, but in a smart way that makes you feel like, oh yeah, like this isn't possible. But then again, going back to what you mentioned earlier about this, as the illusions are dropping, as trust in those old stories are dropping, it's this opportunity to see things, to meet reality as it is. It's a new opportunity in this transition. If in some ways we're always living in illusions, let's not go to that level. But if you just go into the level of, like, we're dropping this illusion, this older story of this material growth-based neoliberal we talked about, and then we have this opportunity, also this violence, army-based example that you brought about. And it's interesting you mentioned, like, rituals and ways to channel this energy, because, it comes from the seeing that the human condition is both light and dark. And the neoliberal story, the story of capitalism as well, is the story that, like, we will pieces this utopian peace is possible if we trade, if we have, like, enough money, if we have our security needs met, we will reach this end peaceful state. And that's, again, another illusion sort of baked into the system, which doesn't allow us to see that actually, even though we have our systems are based on this end game, our reality seems completely full of war and conflict and all kinds of violence, physical and non-physical. And so we need to almost, like, meet this dark and light side. And we can't move to a light forest world without meeting the dark in us, in the world around us.
Absolutely.
And then start to shift.
I mean, yin yang, right?
Yeah.
It's within the yin there is that speck of yang, and within the yang there's that speck of yin. And I think this is why the yin yang well, it's not framework, but the image, well, we could argue it's sort of like the Chinese OS, right? Operating
well,
system.
reality is operating, so
I think, and that's actually, I feel, a great example of light forest, dark forest, because within the dark forest, there is that patch of light that we're moving towards. And even within the light forest, there is that understanding that the dark exists. You know, it's not Manichaean. It's not entirely black and white.
If you come here back in 5 years, you know, it's going to be...
Well, we'll see what happens here in 5 years.
5 hours.
Oh, sorry, 5 hours.
5 hours.
Yeah, 5 hours would be quite different. So, you know, and I also, the point I wanted to make about what you're saying is, and meeting people, is that, let's frame it this way, whether you see it as depressing or realistic, you know, is again a matter of perspective, but I think we're of a similar age. We are actually close to halfway of a standard human lifespan now in terms of age. And I suppose it's at these points where we start to think, okay, what comes next? What's the future? We think about future generations, even if you're child-free. You know, I look at my niece and nephews and think about the world that they're going to inherit. It doesn't fill me with a lot of joy, but also there's this acknowledgement that life goes on, right? And that we are responsible, whether or not we have biological children, to leave the world in a better place than when we found it. I think there are certainly enough of us that are working towards that every day, whether intellectually, practically speaking, you know, creating those conditions that future generations will inherit. And, you know, I think, you know, for Chinese people, at least, you know, one of the worst things that could ever happen to you is not to have anyone maintain your ancestral tablet in the ancestral hall, not to have a place with the ancestors, right? And if we take away, you know, if we take away the very specific cultural element of that, in a way, why do humans reproduce? Why do we create a world for future generations? It's because I feel like a lot of the time is because we would like to be remembered somehow in history, right? It's not even about dying per se, because we all die, but it's about how will you be remembered and what is the legacy that you leave behind, right? Which is what underpins a lot of the Chinese cultural anxiety or rituals around ancestor veneration and maintaining of ancestral halls. Because you remember who came before you and the world that they left you. Arguably, matter of argument as to whether that's good or not, but what are we going to leave behind for future generations?
So how, as we sort of reach in the sort of tail end, how are you seeing, you said you're sort of halfway, you know, halfway point, half time. How are you seeing your next steps as Jules? How are you navigating these inflection points? What decisions are you making in terms of how you live, how you work, how you relate, family? If you feel free to share as much as you feel comfortable to.
Well, I think it would be helpful to have check back in on a podcast in about a year or so. Well, I did share a view, like broadly speaking, being closer to nature as well. Certainly co-locating within this region, and not just for very practical reasons like lower cost of living, but also because, there is, I think there's a need to both slow down in many senses of the word, but also still be able to be active and vital as part of a community. And I think that Thailand, specifically the Bangkok, Chiang Mai polarity does provide some of that. I think Singapore is what it is. It will always be vibrant and dynamic. For those who want to make a living, or at least, earn a decent amount of money, comparatively speaking, I think the decisions I make and will make in this next half of my life, hopefully if I have it, is around creating some kind of legacy. whether it's with a futures program, whether it's with creating communities that I myself will want to live in and future generations might want to live in, contributing to intellectual thought and practical actions around creating those futures, whether more decentralized or whether helping to build new systems, because I think building new systems are still essential. Whatever that might be, I think that is probably going to be the next phase of my life.
Can you share some insight then, since you mentioned building systems? How do we build complex systems in an uncomplicated way? Because sometimes systems feel so large and huge, and just you're trying to engineer all kinds of outcomes. But how can we move away from this engineering mindset and create new systems that can be emergent?
So I don't think we create or build new systems so much as they emerge and we run with it. So I should probably modify my language from a little earlier. So what I really mean is to be able to harness emergence and to steward the emergence into systems, into new systems. Because the engineering metaphor makes perfect sense when you're in a clear or complicated space where, okay, look, this is how a dam has to work. Yeah, that is engineering, that's complicated. But when engineers, work with, other specialists about with the infrastructural projects of a dam, they also need to understand, the natural features, right? The rivers, the water sources, climate change, and that's where it starts to get complex. So if we're talking about the kinds of systems we would like to see in the future, what I'm really referring to is probably more human systems, right? Communities, the way we relate, and then harnessing the emergence. Well, being able to recognize emergence for what it is, harnessing it, and then being able to say, okay, this is where it might be the most applicable or useful.
That's beautiful. Like community allowing complex systems to emerge through communities in a very organic fashion.
Yeah, because and you can speak to various experts who build communities for a living, and there are tons of them. If they tell you they can create or engineer one, they're probably lying. The best ones who have created, in that sense, communities and have run them are those who have been able to, at the intersection of the natural emergence of people meeting and interests colliding, have been able to harness that and have been able to find sticking points, right? The stickiness that keeps a community together. Yeah.
Beautiful. Maybe as a final question, I want to know, as you're writing your newsletter, and I've been following it, and you're very disciplined with getting issues out.
I try.
and sharing. How do you navigate the information landscape? Like, how have you changed how you read, how you consume, how you learn? What's changing? How do we stay adaptive in this changing learning environment? How are you doing it for yourself? Like, what do your habits look like?
Right. For a start, I would not necessarily recommend my approach to everyone. So I'm multilingual, which helps, but can also be self-defeating sometimes. So I tend to read the same news headline or articles about a certain headline or event in, say, both English and Chinese, right? Because I want to know what, say, CNN is saying and what Xinhua Wang is saying about the same thing. And sometimes it can be quite different. And, especially nowadays when it comes to China watching.
My past life.
Right? I almost never read the translations or the translation takes on what's been said. I actually read the original. And because I can read Chinese, I'm lucky. I'm fortunate enough to do that. I can actually parse it for myself and make inferences rather than relying on oftentimes poor and biased translations, because no translations are ever free of bias. So that's what I do for a start. I read across the spectrum. So I feel, again, hashtag, if one is emotionally easily triggered, maybe don't do that. But I think it's very important to read across the spectrum and to read especially views that you may not agree with. If only because you need to know what people are saying, right? It's actually
you need reality as it is.
Yeah, you need reality as it is. Like, of course, there's absolute swill and slop, and I'm not saying you should spend your time on that. But if, let's say, there's a more right-leaning blogger who actually writes from a coherent perspective, it's important to understand why they see the world like that, or why they think the way they do, and therefore why the communities they are part of think the way they do, because that has major implications for policy, for voter bases, for the way people act. So that's how I do it. It's getting increasingly difficult because I think everyone has an angle, every channel and outlet is pushing something, which is why I also kind of stopped just doing a news roundup a few weeks ago, because I kind of felt it was pointless. I actually think it might be more productive in the best possible way for communities to actually create the news they want to have, in the sense of, okay, shit's always going to happen and people are always going to report about it, and then they're going to write op-eds about it and commentaries about it. What's actually more useful is to shape our own perspective on things and then be able to share it. And of course, you may want to convince people or persuade people of your point of view, and that's a very human instinct, and that's fine, but also be able to make better sense of the world. So I think really that's what the Contrapuntal is about. It's about counterpoint takes, especially from a Southeast Asian perspective, because our voices are not heard enough. Like we're starting to get heard more, but it's not being heard enough. And part of my desire with the Contrapuntal is to be able to bring these counterpoint takes to the bigger narrative table.
Beautiful. Well, we'll share links to your Substack and to other references, and people find you. Are there any other places where you'd like people to find you?
There's LinkedIn, and there is the Substack, and then of course on Seapunk as well. I think that's one of the
maybe we can. It would be nice to maybe leave a short note on how you see people, maybe how opening it up for people to engage with Seapunk, how people can learn to work with you and Sam and others through Seapunk. What might be the ways? What might be a fun way to do it?
Cool. So Seapunk with lowercase s is a movement, like say cyberpunk or steampunk or solarpunk. Belongs to no one. Anyone can call themselves a Seapunk, be part of this movement, and contribute to it however they wish, or just self-identify with it, right? So that's Seapunk with lowercase s. Seapunk Studios, uppercase S and S, is the frame that Sam has created to harness the literary, the creative output from Seapunks like us, who have chosen to be slightly more identified with an organization or a holding studio. And to that end, Seapunk Studios has produced things like South Beast Asia, which was a result of the Klongs and Subak workshop in this April in Bangkok, from the inaugural Seapunk Symposium, Play Shop and Symposium in Chiang Mai last October, which was part of the Pop-Up Village Festival season in Lana, Chiang Mai, Lana. And now we are into season 1 of Seapunk as well, where we are looking at taking all the learnings from the Play Shop and Symposium, from Klongs and Subak, from the Silicon Archipelago, and now South Beast Asia, as we are terming it, and to be able to work with other partners like some of Protocols, with Light Forest, with DigiCNX, which is the Digital Humanities Uncollege, Chiang Mai, and who knows which other partners or collaborators, to basically promote the Seapunk dialect of solarpunk futures, right? If we were to harness our collective reimaginations of Southeast Asia, what might that look like in terms of creating futures for ourselves. So that is Seapunk. Seapunk Studios maintains a newsletter, and quite a number of us are entering the short story contest run by the Summer Protocols for Ghosts and Machines. So I think that will create quite a bit of buzz around how, particularly we in Southeast Asia, see the world and spirits as being part of the world, and the intersection of spirits, ghosts, the spiritual world, and the tech AI world as well.
Well, that's an awesome plug. I can't wait to sort of just experience and see how this movement grows. I think this week we'll have the Seapunk Studios in Chiang Mai.
Yeah.
And we'll put links down, and I think it's exciting as we grow movements to intersect and see how actually everything that we're doing is just really overlapping and intersecting, and it doesn't have to be in a very rigid hierarchical way. It's just happening in an emergent fashion.
Exactly. There's some complexity in action.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Jules, thank you so much for coming here. Thank you much for sharing just a little bit of the many many insights that you have to share. And I look forward to seeing how your journey unfolds in the second half of your life. And perhaps we'll be able to share more, living more closer with nature and seeing what it's like for us city creatures to,
colonize. This is going to be interesting. Let's see how those tomatoes grow. Well, thank you for having me in your light forest. It's beautiful.